There's no way to vote the next thing. The very same thing.
Prefer to keep my vote to myself and not to vote to anyone. And not to be excluded. We're not included in anything. It makes us feel less important.
I don't think we're the right people to actually vote. You see, the right people who are supposed to vote is the ones in the government themselves. Those who are enjoying the credit.
Good Wednesday night. I'm Tebogo, and thank you for joining us tonight here on In Focus. What's the motivation for not wanting to vote? Do voters understand their rights and responsibilities enough to be able to exercise that right freely? And how do we encourage disgruntled voters who are threatening to boycott these elections because of a lack of service delivery or political party squabbles? And is the Independent Electoral Commission doing enough to educate voters about the power they have to bring change into their communities ahead of these elections? Joining me for that conversation tonight, the IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Mawethu Mosery, Sheilan, Clarke from My Vote Counts, as well as political commentator Tebogo, Khaas. You can be a part of this conversation. We want you to take your phone and get in touch with us on WhatsApp, 072-110-5584. We'll take you live with your questions. Otherwise, you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405 if you would like to give us a comment. And Dr. Mosery, good evening. Babu Khaas, as well as Sheilan, good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. And Dr. Khaas, I'll start with you. Looking at the numbers, right, of voter turnout, there is clearly a drop in the number of turning out to vote. A decline in turnout, if you're looking at, for example, numbers since 2004 to 2019 of at least 8%, right? Now, it is thought that high turnout is a sign of enthusiasm and the politically involved society, and low turnout is associated with voter apathy, but even more so with a mistrust of the political process. And therefore, that brings into question the degree and the level of our voter education and civic education. Do South Africans understand their rights and responsibilities enough as we get into these elections to be able to exercise that right freely?
Thank you for having me on, Tabo, and good evening to the other colleagues on the panel. You know, you have to spare a thought and feel some sympathy for the voters, especially in South Africa. Given the fact that every day, if not every hour, there are news of malfeasance or maladministration of public resources. And it gets to a point where people become so disillusioned to the extent that they feel that even by voting, it doesn't make any difference, or it wouldn't make any difference at all insofar as whichever political party or representatives are on the ballot, because they see year in, year out, poor service delivery being the order of the day, and politicians themselves, they only avail themselves to communities during election cycles. After elections, you hardly hear anything. And what is also disquieting is the fact that there seems to be a disconnect, or not a distinction being made or distilled to differentiate between national and local government elections. Because we see senior politicians, if you see a whole president of a republic crisscrossing the country's hinterland and checks, it confuses voters as to whether is this a local election, is it about local issues, or is it about national issues? And it's not the situation is not made any much easier, because if you hear spokespersons of political parties, in this instance I'll quote Pulemare, who invoked the social grants as being a threat of something that will be removed if voters don't vote for the ANC or in a particular way. So only an empowered voter will understand that social grants do not have anything to do with local elections or service delivery, because the issues that they are about is issues of electricity, refuse removal, water, sanitation, and roads and so forth, and not issues that politicians tend to want to conflate with national issues.
So if you hear if we hear statements like I have not registered to vote because I feel that even if I did register to vote, I would not be making an informed choice, right? Another statement saying I feel like elections are a waste of time, even though people feel like they are expressing their democratic views and their right to vote. Actually, nothing really happens. Another one says I cannot say my vote will make a difference. It makes a difference to the political parties, but I don't see it making a difference to me. Would you say that's an indication, in a sense, that we have dropped the ball on the critical aspects of the mandate of the IEC of voter education?
Absolutely, because for as long as you hear such sentiments being expressed, where people say, I rather don't show, this no-show, what we call no-show paradox, I rather not show up than go there. It shows that voters are not sufficiently empowered or sufficiently edified on the essence of voting, and that if you are not happy with a particular political party or a particular representative in a local election, you ought to go and express your dissatisfaction by changing your vote and giving to somebody else who might prove to be much better in terms of delivery. It may not be your first choice, but to be able to allocate it to somebody else. Because by sitting back and not going to vote, you are not helping the situation, because it might very well be that it actually works in favor of the very same party or political or politicians that you are dissatisfied.
Let's bring in Mosery here. Mosery, good evening. Good to have you with us tonight. Are you dropping the ball as the IEC when you hear such sentiments saying these things don't cater for us, and people are saying they're saying nothing to us really? It's just going to be a normal day for us, and we're going to carry on with our business.
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to fellow panelists and your viewers. It's not a question of dropping the ball. There are a number of variations to the reasons of our voter turnout as a country. But for starters, let me indicate that for local government, we've seen an upward trajectory since 2000. The wall-to-wall municipal arrangement we have in the country, we've seen that voter turnout go up. It is not above the national and provincial elections. Last elections, we can round it off at 57%. Therefore, we expect it to go up for these elections, but that's where we are coming from, about 52%. So it's going up for local government. Now, people exercise a choice to participate or not to participate. And in terms of our constitutional framework and the issues of basic rights in the Bill of Rights, that choice must be exercised by voters. The question that we might have is, are they sufficiently informed to make that choice? And we would want to argue that we've done either on our communication side, where we just inform of the electoral processes, or from our civic education side, where we say it is important, it is valuable to participate in your democracy, particularly because we still claim that our democracy in South Africa is still very young, less than 30 years. So we need to continuously nurture it and build it in terms of civic education.
How do you explain the no-show phenomenon? I'm going to give you a chance and you can continue. But I want you to just talk about how do you explain the no-show phenomenon, where a voter feels, no, I will punish my preferred political party for non-delivery by not showing up at the polls?
Well, it's still an exercise of choice by the voter to say, with everything I have seen or I have experienced, I exercise a choice not to support my political party or my politician in my geographic area. It's still an exercise of choice. Yeah. There's a funny message that we saw being used in the rhetoric of past campaigns. Some parties saying, even if you don't come to vote, you've actually contributed to the election outcome, especially if you are also a registered voter, in the sense that a low voter turnout gives us a different outcome from a high voter turnout election. And these are things that probably people like Tebogo, who do research and scientific opinions, will continuously be observing the impact of withdrawing your vote to the actual outcome and the party that ends up in government or the individual that ends up leading as an elected representative.
But does not worry you that people might not understand then the type of elections that are being contested and how they work? And I must admit, even myself, having done this job for as long as I've done it, I'm only understanding it now, what this whole phenomenon of how, for example, an independent vote would work when it comes to the PR number of votes when they are being tallied, and how those votes could essentially be lost for the independent candidate, as opposed to being in a party where then they will be collected and they will mean something as far as the PR vote is concerned. How many people actually understand those dynamics?
Well, it differs with different areas, and it differs with the experiences of that geographic area, in this case, a particular ward in the country. Those that have worked very closely with their elected representative, they have a different experience and how beneficial it is to work closely with your local councillor, a ward councillor. But in other spheres, they've not had that close interaction during the 5-year term. They have a very different experience, and they would want to make the message stronger that maybe it's not valuable to go out and vote, whereas those who work much closer with their elected representative, they would see the need to go out there and participate and be part of the process. And I think we have a big challenge in civic education, whether we're doing it at early stages of life or with the 20 to 30-year-olds starting their responsible roles in the space of citizenship. We still have a challenge to say to everyone here, a civic duty and a civic responsibility means that whether you get something in return immediately or you see a benefit in your community. And the biggest problem we have is that the recent campaigns tend to focus on individual benefit out of a government. Right. Whereas it should be community interest and community benefit.
But Mosery, I want to take a break. I'll come back. Sheilan, I want you to weigh in on this. Mosery saying, well, the no-show phenomenon is still an exercise of your democratic right not to participate. I want to hear how you feel about that. But when we come back also, Mosery, I want you to answer to this question of disinformation, of a social relief program being attached to a local government elections, and why the IEC is not dealing with that degree of misinformation. Mawethu, Mosery, Sheilan, Clarke, as well as Tebogo, Khaas staying on with us tonight. You can be a part of this conversation. Send us your WhatsApp message now, 072-110-5584. Is the IEC doing enough in voter education in the build-up to these November 1st local government elections? In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back. You're live tonight on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. The conversation on the work of the IEC in educating voters in the country, particularly the young voter, the first-time voter between those ages of 18 and 19. Do they really understand or have enough knowledge to can enable them to feel like they can effectively participate in these upcoming local government elections? Sheilan, what's your feeling?
Look, there's no doubt that people do understand, the importance of voting, especially in local government elections, because we see with each election, and with this one, new parties coming up, forming, and contesting in the elections. In this one, we have independent candidates, putting themselves up for councillors. So people do understand the role of voting. But it is also important to note that to take part in the democratic process, that is not limited just to voting. I mean, voting is a choice, as we've mentioned before the break. You do have the choice to vote or not, but also you have the right to protest. I mean, protesting is a way in which you can participate in the democratic process. So I think rather the question is, not do they understand the importance of voting, but the issue is, do they understand how to hold these leaders to account? Because there is the accountability issue. Because people are not voting because, we still have potholes, we still have no access to water, we still have that issues in our municipality. There's this accountability issue. I mean, we as Mawethu Council, we're working with several communities, grassroots level communities in and around the Western Cape and the Free State, and you see how people have lost faith in their municipalities. So we have, like, for instance, in Bonteheuwel here in Cape Town, residents are fixing their own potholes. They are cleaning their own drainage systems because they have no faith in municipalities. So the question should be: do we have enough information around how to hold these people accountable? It's not just voting on 1st November. There's a whole process afterwards. It's like, do I know who the councillor is? Do I have him on WhatsApp? The role of a councillor is there should be monthly meetings with the communities. Does that happen? There's all these things. So do we know these processes? Is this accessible? Do we know these processes?
So whose mandate is it, to ask the question, Sheilan, to then teach people about our political system and how it's actually supposed to work?
I actually wish I learned this in school. Because, it really does, because we are asking people who turn 18 to go and vote. You are fresh out of school. You don't know anything about voting. So, it rests on all of us, schools, not just the IEC, us, civil society, also political parties. It rests on us, on Parliament, to make, civic education accessible. Again, like I'm saying, not just, the voting structures and what's the difference between local government elections, which to me really is, elections are important, but I think this is the most important one because this deals with service delivery, and that's a big issue in this country. In the last Auditor General's report, out of the 257 municipalities, only 27 got clean audits. So the local government is a mess at the moment. Yeah. So, I think it rests on all of us, schools, us, civil society, IEC, and political parties, so not just the IEC.
You mentioned the question of protests. Do people understand the role of protest votes in enhancing participatory democracy and ensuring that you hold those you want to hold accountable, you bring them to account?
So that's, again, it comes to the point of, this accountability issue. Yes, like I said, protesting is a way in which we can exercise, our democratic right, raising our voices, because when you look at it, service delivery protest is essentially a protest against local government. So, we are letting local government know, hey, we are struggling with potholes, or hey, we don't have water, like the community, the Makana municipality, where the organization there, the Unemployed People's Movement, took that municipality to court because they didn't have any access to water and basic services. So these protests does show that, look, local government is not working for us, but it's just that accountability aspect. We really need to focus on how these mechanisms work, because we really can't take all our municipalities to court. Yeah. You shouldn't just go to court action. We can't just take everybody to court. There needs to be a system of accountability within our municipality structures, within the party structures.
Before I get Mosery to comment, let's take a call from David from George. David, good evening. Good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. Thanks for the call. What's your comment? What's your question? All right, we don't seem to have David right now. We'll try and get him on that line in a moment. But before we get back to David, but Mosery, just answer that question that was raised by Tebogo in a moment. Social relief programs that for many voters, it's kind of said all the time that the ANC uses social grants to mobilize votes. But there are voters who really do tie up the fortunes of the governing party to their social relief program. And what is the IEC doing about that degree of disinformation?
Just probably not on that specific issue per se, but say broadly, there's need for political parties to also campaign in a way that motivates the broader citizenry to participate. To an extent, as Sheilan says, people know when the election will take place. They know that they will have 3 ballots, 2 ballots, depending on which municipality they are in. They would know all those basic things about the election itself, but they are not motivated to go make sure that party so and so is in government in their geographic area. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done by political parties in terms of their messaging, in terms of their manifestos to bring voters to the polls. On the specific areas of misinformation, it is something that we are starting to deal with. We started in the 2019 elections, looking at how we closely work with social media platforms to ensure that we minimize misinformation and disinformation. And matters like those, if they do occur, we actually encourage citizens to report them to us so that we have a basis on which to act. But also we encourage other political parties to do so. But also it is possible to approach the Electoral Court on a matter like that and ask for their intervention, and the courts will consider that. So in our role, we are either able to facilitate a conciliatory environment between the contesting parties, or we interact with the party consent to desist from such messages. But we do need a trigger of a report of some sort.
Let's take some calls. David is calling us in George. David, good evening. All right, we don't have David there. Lucky in Sibuke, good evening.
Yes, how are you?
Good, Lucky. Go ahead.
No, fine. Revolutionary greeting for viewers. Ne?
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, I will start to blame the IEC. The IEC, it looks like it's biased. They can't tell us that they don't have money to do workshops on the ground in our communities, firstly. Because why? Not all of our communities understand how to put in the party in power, how to take out the party in power, out of power. Now, really, somehow, they can't tell us that all these years, they can tell people that they must go to vote, but not to workshop them how to vote, how to take out the party. Because people, they just stand at home and say that we are not going to vote, not understanding that if they are not going to vote, those votes, like they did vote in 10 years back, that vote it will remain for that party that is in power in that time. Now, really, somehow, we can't run away from the fact, and we can't turn the blind eye to say the IEC is captured. That is why some of the politicians, not leaders, I'm not calling these people leaders, they are politicians, because there's a difference between the leader and the politician.
Right, exactly.
They are proudly to say they will lead until Jesus comes. Now, two, my wish, South Africans, we have a problem of thinking. We put these people in power. We are afraid to take them in power. Also, we can't allow, and on our age, to be addressed. Like, look at Naledi Pandor, look at Kwente Mantashe. They want to die in power. We have young people that they can take over now.
All right.
They are very smarter than them.
Okay.
We must take out all these grannies and grandfathers that are in parliament out to start afresh, to renew our country.
Got you.
Sold our country, it's enough.
I got to move on. Thank you very much. Mosery, just answer to that question of workshops. I mean, talk to us about the initiatives that you've embarked on, particularly to assist voters to better understand their rights and responsibilities on how to put people in power, as Lucky puts it, and how to take them out of power.
Thanks, Tabo. And definitely we will be overstepping our mandate if we used his language to take a party out of power and put a different one. But the end product of our work actually does that. If you retain this leader, it would be through a legitimate, transparent process that we are entrusted with. Now, in terms of our voter education, let me first indicate that we've taken new initiatives owing to our COVID-19 environment in the country. One of those things is we've done a lot more audio recordings of our messages that encourage participation. We've also done animations for social media that depict different things around the reasons why people should go and vote. And we've looked also at COVID-19 on voting day to just say to the voters, it will be safe, because it may not encourage all citizens to go out and vote on fear of getting COVID at the voting station. So we have a very strong message to encourage voters and to indicate to them that it would be safe. We've continued with community engagements in smaller groupings of workshops and also information sharing platforms. Those are activities that we do have. Then we do a bit of work in social media and in print newspapers. Yeah. And we've had a good relationship with television in terms of those animations being beamed, right, for all South Africans to interact with them. So those are the elements of a campaign related to the election day. But beyond that, we've been working with tertiary institutions, the technical colleges in the country. All of them have had programs where we interact with their community of students. With all our universities in the country, we've got a program to interact with their community of right, students. But in the month of April, we focused on scholars in our high schools, right, and we engaged with them for a good 4 weeks on civic education, as Sheilan was suggesting that if we can get this at a school level, it would be the best thing. And basic education is doing just that in collaboration with ourselves.
Let's leave it there for tonight. I appreciate you all for coming through. Unfortunately, time always the enemy. Tebogo, Khaas, rather, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much for coming through. Sheilan, Clarke, as well as Mawethu, Mosery, the IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer.